So for 40 years, he was a newspaper man, a true journalist. I love that background. And he told me off air he has 6,000 incomplete stories in a big blue box. I want to go and dive into that big blue box and see some of the things that he's written. He is a prolific writer, novelist. Michael Stephen Daigle joins us, and here on Author's Corner, we're going to talk about Dragony Rising, a Frank Nagler novel. He's got 5 of them, and this is book 5, and the character is so darn interesting. So we welcome him to America Tonight with me, Kate Delaney. Thanks for coming on, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Kate. I appreciate it very much. Love to talk about this stuff. I'm glad to meet you.
So let's talk about the detective, Frank Nagler. How'd you come up with him?
I was, when I got out of college, I sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to write a mystery series. And at the time, I wasn't a particularly well-read mystery writer. I mean, it's a genre that everyone goes back and reads all the Conan Doyle and all the Dashiell Hammetts and John le Carré's and all of that. I had seen Maltese Falcon 3 times, and that was about my research. But I said, you know what, I can do this. Let me just sit down and see what I can do. So I wrote a book called A Game Called Dead, which became the second book in the series after rewrites. And I invented Frank Nagler, a character, a reporter named Jimmy Dawson, and Nagler's friend, Leonard, who's a blind bookstore owner. Because when you were 23, that made perfect sense. And the problem with Frank in the first version of the story is that he was 75. He was a retired cop, and he was meddling in a investigation. And I realized that I couldn't have him 75 because if I was going to write a series about him, he was going to die before anyone else did. So I de-aged him, kept most of his characteristics. He's lonely. He has some personal grief, and he's sort of a regular guy. And over time, the backstory for him developed. And in this current series, which I moved to New Jersey, he's the native of an old industrial town, Ironton, New Jersey, that's seen good times and bad times. And his grandfather was an iron miner, and his father worked in the mills, and he grew up in the poor side of town called the Workers' Ghetto. At one point, he's a walker. As a kid, he ran the streets of Ironton for fun. Now, as a police officer, he walks the streets learning what they can tell him. And I think readers like him because he is a regular guy. He doesn't drive a sports car. He's as computer illiterate as the rest of us. And he needs help, and he tries to admit that. But the story arc on him is that he doesn't ask for help all the time. And the current one that I'm working on, called Nagler's Secret, gets down to that question of why he doesn't ask for help all the time.
So he picks up these cases. Like, for example, in this book, how does this case come to him, and what's it about? What is he chasing in Dragony Rising?
In Dragony Rising, there is an underlying theme in all the books of sort of a smattering, in a couple of the books, the corruption's right up front. But there is a smattering through all the books of this backstory of a long-standing conspiracy. And Dragony Rising is about that conspiracy jumping to the front page. The tagline on the book is, "What happens when you find out that the explosion that levels 2 blocks of Ironton, New Jersey is not the worst thing that happens?" So the Dragony is an organization that in modern times are sort of thugs for hire. But in ancient times, when his grandfather was working in the mines, they were the guys hired by the mine owners to keep everyone in line. They threatened workers, they threatened immigrants, they kind of did what they felt like to keep things in charge. And over time, they have kind of morphed into this, protection racket. And they show up in in Ironton, ready to do the bidding of a oddball collection of folks, politicians, businessmen, insurance guys, who have a plan. How they're working on a plan of how to take over the city of Ironton and use it as a model for how they're going to take over other towns and eventually the state of New Jersey.
And so when you look at this group, Dragony, this is a real threat to Nagler. How does he handle that danger, especially knowing the history?
He finds out the history gradually, and he gets the fun part of writing about this is that there's about 12 bad guys, and they have their own culture, and they're threats to themselves, and he has to insert himself into that threat. And he finds himself and his friends targeted by random elements of the Dragony. And the name comes from one of the guys explains it in a newspaper story that Jimmy Dawson finds. And he said, "Why are you called the Dragon?" He said, "Well, you know what? We were kids. We thought it sounded scary." And the cover of the book shows the city of Ironton being engulfed by a symbolic dragon, and that's the element of the story that we write about. And they do things like, they try to kill him a couple of times. They chase the police captain around. They beat up her girlfriend. They shoot Jimmy Dawson is now using drones to record stuff for his news website. They shoot the drone out of the sky because they're afraid of what he might find. So there's this constant threat, and the story is written so you get about a moment's breath in between threats as the police sort of piece the thing together. And then there's this. It all starts with this. He's at a police academy lecture, and a girl comes up and says, "Hi, you have to take this case. It's about my father. He's been in jail, falsely charged for 15 years." And he doesn't want to take it because he gets that approach all the time. But he eventually does, and he looks at the notes, and there's this question. He sort of remembers the case. And then he begins to ask the question, why wasn't this resolved? Because it wasn't. And that's the opening into figuring out who the Dragony is. And then there's a very dramatic scene at the end where the Dragony tells everyone who they are. And then there's the dramatic ending, which is a surprising ending.
Don't tell us the ending. No spoilers for everybody.
No spoilers, but it's an ending that was well seeded in the story. And when you see the ending, you realize when that seed was planted about 100 pages before that. It's an intricate. The thing about writing mysteries for me is I like writing messy stories. You throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And then the stuff that stays put, you figure out how to connect it. And then you put a character like Frank Nagler who takes on this stuff because he feels a dedication to his city, for one reason, but also because every time he takes one on, he gets threatened by something, or his friends get threatened by someone, and he has to act. And then you just sort out the pieces until what you hope is a satisfying conclusion for the reader.
And is Jimmy Dawson sort of a little bit of you?
No, actually not. I thought of Jimmy Dawson a decade before I got in the newspaper business. But I figured out when I was going to write the story, and I figured out later there are elements to a mystery story that I want to see. I want to see a newspaper reporter because they can do things that the cops can't do. And I needed a diner, so I took an actual diner from Dover, New Jersey named Barry's, and used that as a central meeting place for many of the characters. And it's a typical diner. The commuters are there grabbing coffee. The regulars are there arguing about the Giants over eggs and bacon. And then I invented Leonard because as the story developed, I needed a central character to represent the economic ups and downs of Ironton. And he starts as a bookstore owner and gradually becomes a mini developer. And you try to create a complete world. And Dawson, later on, as I got into the newspaper business and worked with many, many talented colleagues, he takes on characteristics that they have in real life. There's certain bravery, certainly willingness to take on difficult stories and to put himself in the line of fire, which happens a couple of times. It's sort of is that my newspaper career in fantasy? Yes and no. So
yeah, you can see it. I mean, the 12 bad guys, you gotta love that. And what an interesting character Frank is, and the people that you've created around him. There's no question about that. And again, the name of the book is Dragony Rising. This one, a Frank Nagler novel. It is book 5. We can't wait to see what happens in the future. We could talk to you, I think, all day long. Michael Stephen Daigle, you can get this book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you, Kate. Appreciate your interest. It was great fun to talk about it.